to speak.
Yep. Preparing to live stream the webinar. Okay. And there we go. We are now live.
So, dear viewers, dear colleagues, I'm Justinas Kulis, project manager at the Eastern Europe Studies Center, and it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this virtual event that is aimed to present the cooperation between the Eastern Europe Studies Center and our great partners from Slovakia, GLOBSEC, to present all the things we've done during this year. And this year, our cooperation is really successful. We have a lot of deliverables we made during the different projects we had, and I'm really proud that I had an opportunity to manage those projects from our side. So the cooperation has been especially productive in 2021. During this year, the EESC contributed to the annual GLOBSEC Trends study that is aimed at examining and comparing public opinions regarding the state of democracy, belief in conspiracy theories, trust in institutions, and new media consumption habits, as well as the influence of foreign actors such as Russia on China in 10 different European countries. The second combined result of our work this year is the elections in Belarus, Two Perspectives. It's an interactive game launched at the start of the school year. It's aimed to increase youth interest in foreign policy issues and allows us to look at the last year's presidential elections in Belarus from two different perspectives. And I think it's a great start looking for new tools for education and including, younger and younger generations in learning about foreign policy. Last but not least, in the partnership with GLOBSEC, the EESC is planning to release a policy paper, Vladimir Putin's Politics of History, How It Works, and how to keep it in check about Russian propaganda involving the historical memory in Eastern and Central Europe. So the paper is written. We still have a few things to change, but in a week we will be releasing it, and I hope you will find it interesting to read. And my colleague Vladimir Putin, senior analyst from the Eastern Europe Studies Center, will also provide you with some insights about it today. I'm really happy to see that the cooperation between the EESC and GLOBSEC is beneficial because it creates opportunities to build bridges between different institutions and experts from different European states, as it's not only a project we are working on. And I'm really thankful to our colleagues, Dominika and Katerina, for our friendship and cooperation during this year, and I hope it will continue in the future. And I think with our cooperation, we are really building more resilient societies with all that actions, with all the tools we create, with all new finds way. Some of them might be, more popular, some of them might be less popular, but I think, only through doing we can learn something new. And with that, I want to give the floor to Katerina Klingova from GLOBSEC, and she will be presenting the GLOBSEC Trends research results. So Katerina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justinas. Thank you, Jurgis, for the invitation for organizing this webinar. It's a great pleasure to be cooperating with you guys and have you as our Lithuanian partners. I have a presentation, so I'm going to share a screen and show you some charts from our GLOBSEC Trends. GLOBSEC Trends, it is our, let's say, key output that we've been doing since 2016. And we started, it's a regular, very specific public opinion polls we started to do in 2016. We started with 3 countries, and the past 2 years we were very lucky to be able to conduct public opinion polls in 10 European countries. These cover also Baltic countries, which provides us with a unique perspective. These GLOBSEC Trends 2021, the data for them was collected in March 2021, and it's a representative sample of 1,000 plus respondents per every single country. So GLOBSEC Trends provides insights on 10,000 respondents from Central and Eastern Europe. We've been polling questions on the perceptions of friends and foes, perception of threats, perception of democracy and trust in public institutions. And then we also polled several conspiracy theories and questions connecting with COVID this year. So when it comes to geopolitics, we found out that majority of Central and Eastern Europeans want to be in the European Union, and European Union membership of these countries is uncontested, as you can see from this chart. However, there is still a lack of understanding of how European Union functions and who are its main representatives, which you can see on a question that 32% of Central and Eastern Europeans never heard of or do not know how to perceive Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. This is an average number, but in case of Latvia, 41% of Latvians do not know or never heard of Ursula von der Leyen, 39% of Estonians, 38% of Latvians, or for example, 29% of Slovaks do not know or never heard of Ursula von der Leyen. So despite the fact that Central and Eastern Europeans want to be in the European Union and EU membership is uncontested, there is still a lack of understanding and a lack of understanding of what does the EU stand for and who are its main representatives that we need to work on. When it comes to strategic partnerships, we see from this chart that there is a big difference on how Germany and France is perceived in all the 10 countries we did the polling in. 86% of Austrians perceive Germany as their most important strategic partner, while only 42% of Romanians think similarly. And there's a big difference, between perception of France and Germany as a strategic partners for particular countries. When it comes to big three, the most important global actors, perception of the United States, Russia, and China, we also perceive huge differences when it comes to perception of these countries as strategic partnerships among Central and Eastern Europeans. On one hand, you have Poland, Lithuania, or Estonia, and also Romania, where majority of the respondents say that it is the United States that is the most important strategic partner for their country. On the other side, you have Bulgaria or Slovakia, where pan-Slavic connection of these countries to Russia tends or has an impact on perceptions of Russia being the most important strategic partner for these countries. An outlier in this sense is Hungary, where 35% and 30% perceive Russia and China accordingly as the most important strategic partner for Hungary, in comparison, only to 13% perceiving United States as the most important strategic partner. When it comes to NATO membership of these countries is once again uncontested. On average, 73% of Central and Eastern Europeans support NATO membership of their countries. However, it ranges from 54% in Bulgaria to 89% in Poland. When it comes to China, we found an interesting thing that Central and Eastern Europeans do not know a lot of things about China. And this is possible to observe on a question on perception of the president of China, Xi Jinping, where only 16% of respondents in Central and Eastern Europe perceive him positively. On the other hand, 46%, majority of the respondents, never heard of him or do not know him. So this is an important, gap that can be used for influence manipulation from China. Despite the fact that not a lot of Central and Eastern Europeans know a lot of things about China, when we ask the question on whether Chinese regime could be an inspiration for your country, we see big differences among the perceptions of the respondents. On one hand, you have Romania with 30% saying that yes, Chinese regime could be an inspiration for their country, On the other hand, you have, 8% of Polish or 8% of Czech respondents saying that China could be an inspiration. When it comes to Baltic countries, we see that quite a big percentage of population, 23 in Latvia or 19 in Lithuania, do not know or wouldn't be able to say, whether China could be, or Chinese regime could be an inspiration for their country. And such, undecidedness could be eventually utilized by good influence operation or information operation in future. When it comes to democracy, we found out that in the time of COVID and pandemic, there are big differences when it comes to trust and whom do Central and Eastern European trust. The most trusted public institution was or were armed forces with 75%. 68% of Central and Eastern European trusted medical authorities and scientists in March when we conducted this polling, and only 42% of respondents on average trusted national governments. When we break this trust in government down according to the countries, we see there are big differences. 60% of Austrians trust their government, or 58% of Estonians trust their government, while only 32% or 33% of respondents trust their government in Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, or Czechia. When it comes to democracy, one thing that we've been observing for a few years now is a smear campaign, intensive smear campaign against liberalism or liberal policies, or basically anything that has an adjective liberal, in the region. And this is possible to observe on two questions. When you ask respondents a question whether a democracy as a system based on equality, human rights, and freedoms and rule of law is a good system of governments for their country, on average 85% say yes, and everybody says that yes, of course we support, we want to be a democratic country. However, when you add an adjective liberal to the same question in front of democracy, such support for liberal democracy significantly decreases, and only 69% of Central and Eastern Europeans adhere and support and agree with such declaration. When we break this down again on countries, we see that there's a big difference. 88% of Central and Eastern Europeans think that democracy is a good system for their country. When you add the liberal to it, that number drops to 60%. Lithuania is an interesting outlier because only 70% of respondents say that democracy as a system of governance is good for their country. When you add an adjective liberal to it, that perception drops to 50%. When we ask questions for the support of an autocratic leader, and we've been asking this question for 2 years now, we found out that the support for a strong, decisive leader who doesn't have to bother with parliament or election, and such system of governance is good for one's country. We found out that such perceptions have increased in 5 out of the 6 countries we did the similar polling in 2020. And there are big differences and big preference for such autocratic leadership. 62% of respondents in Bulgaria, 58% of respondents in Romania, but also 54% of respondents in Latvia and 46% of respondents in Lithuania prefer a strong autocratic leader, and would prefer him or her instead of traditional democratic processes. And all these things eventually have a big impact on COVID-19 conspiracy theories and belief in conspiracy theories in Central and Eastern Europe. And here, once again, we observe big differences. On one hand, we see that majority, well, not majority, but most of Bulgarians, 40%, believe various conspiracy theories in comparison to only 12% of Austrians who believe same conspiracy theories about COVID-19. These questions we've asked contain question on the fact that COVID-19 is fake or doesn't exist, or whether COVID-19 is a COVID-19 pandemic is a planned operation by hidden forces elites to control the population. So still 1 year within the pandemic, a huge percentage of populations in various Central and Eastern European countries believed in conspiracy theories connected to COVID-19. Interesting thing we observed when it comes to Baltic states, Estonia, in Estonia, only 16% of respondents believe such conspiracy theories, while in Latvia and Lithuania, 27 and 26% of respondents believe them as well. Distrust in media has increased in 7 out of 10 countries we did the polling in, an increase on average from 50% to 58%. An interesting outlier is Estonia, where trust actually in media has increased, and it is one of the 2 countries where the trust in media has increased to 62%. I believe that this is all for me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll pass the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you. It's a great presentation, and I think these researches are really very important when we can compare different countries and different numbers, and at the same time to see the same questions being asked every year, and to evaluate situation if in our countries we've done enough or we should do some more homework. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Jurgis Vedrickas, and he will present a game about the election in Belarus. Jurgis, please.
Obviously, it's not only the election that we had in there. So yes, the game, elections in Belarus, 2 perspectives. As the game might suggest, there are 2 perspectives to it. Perhaps you'll be familiar with it. There are old adventure books, choose your own adventure, where you turn to a page and it indicates, okay, if you choose this, you go to this page. If you choose this, then you go to the other page. And the adventure develops that way. So it's a similar concept. And there are, of course, video games out there that operate on a similar basis as well. So we spent a good few months with the Justinas and our other expert colleagues putting together the scenarios, the various responses and options and whatnot for it. Of course, on one side, we had the Belarusian opposition trying to somehow overcome what Lukashenko's placed before and after the elections. And of course, on the other side, we have the Belarusian regime, which we didn't specify by name, but I'm pretty sure that most anyone should be able to recognize what we're actually talking about in that case. So yes, we involved numerous experts while we were developing it, discussing with them, does this sound feasible? Should we approach it this way or another way? And from a professional perspective, I think it was very interesting because, similarly to tabletop exercises that you often have, there were numerous debates of, do you really think that Russia would respond this way? Or do you think, an armed uprising, for example, is that even possible? And you have these sort of questions flying around. So the development of the game, I think, and I would say is an educational process, not only for those who are on the receiving end of it, but also for those who are developing it themselves. And it can, of course, be seen as an excellent use case of technologies for the educational process, because, you know, not all students nowadays are particularly engaged with the content that they might be given during the lessons. You know, some of them might snooze off when they're being given lectures and whatnot. But this helps with engagement, and I think that remains an important factor, perhaps even more so nowadays when kids are, you know, taught to consume the momentary content, and might not have the same attention spans, arguably, as before. And at the same time, there's an element of choice and consequence, because when you tell someone that, okay, if this happens, you know, trying to explain directly, it might not come through to them. But when they're put on the spot and when they have to ostensibly make the decisions themselves, they have to make the choice. Okay, I'm going to do this versus that. And when they see that, okay, this has resulted in this, perhaps I've upset the public, and maybe I don't want to do that because, well, they might overthrow me or whatnot. And it just points out that sometimes you have to make compromises, and you can't always choose as your ideology, as your morals even might dictate. So I think it's a very good educational tool in that perspective. And at the same time, you could say it's a bit similar to the saying that, you know, give a man a fish, you'll feed them for a day, teach them to fish, then they'll be fed for a lifetime. Similarly, in this case, instead of spoon feeding them information, you're allowing them to actually learn from experience, you could say, from actually going through those scenarios and working with them, thinking about them, conceptualizing what could work, what might not work. Of course, there is the limitation that we create the scenarios, and perhaps not always perfectly accurately, perhaps not always perfectly representing what the people playing the game might expect within it. But that's life, you know. Sometimes the unexpected happens. So it's a good way to go about it in that regard. And as I mentioned, since the attention spans sometimes aren't big, the games themselves are in bite-sized chunks. The game can be completed within some 7 to 10 minutes, and that's really great because you can slot it in, you can integrate it into teaching content. And I was thinking that imagine having a full course that has these sort of integrated scenarios within it, and how that could supplement the actual teaching content. And I think that could be very beneficial. As homework even, you know, instead of playing some video game that perhaps might not have any particular content that, you know, teaches you anything, perhaps try something like this. For some people, it might work. The scalability is good, because of course, me and Justinas, we did put in a lot of work, but you can always expand it. And the good thing is that even if you expand it, it might not necessarily expand in terms of how long it takes to get through the game, just might offer more diversity in terms of, you know, the outcomes, and perhaps, how should I say, even more creative outcomes. Some of those that we maybe skipped over because, okay, this isn't very likely, we don't have the resources, the time to really focus on something this niche. So let's focus on the big stuff, on the things that, you know, most likely to happen. So yeah, I believe that it is a very worthwhile approach, and hopefully perhaps we'll be able to return to it at some point. I think I would enjoy it. Perhaps Justinas would as well. I see him smiling there, so that's good. But yeah, in the end, it's only really limited by the time you have available and by your imagination, and of course your knowledge, because you want to try and keep it as realistic as possible so it actually teaches something. So that would really be all for me, only really being brief about it.
Yes, thank you, Jurgis. For me, it also was the most memorable moments was when you are sitting really tired and you're still discussing one same question with an expert because you cannot agree whether it should be, I don't know, -5 or -10 after, you know, take one action, and how would, for example, the West will react. Will they give you -5 or -10? So it was really very interesting, I think, to create that game. And I think it's also a good step, because for the EESC, it was the first time we do something like that. And we were really happy about that, because, with new generations, every time, we have to also adapt to new technology. And in this world that is full of information, it's sometimes hard to get, to the correct one. And I think in cooperation with the GLOBSEC, we're trying to do this thing. And now I would like to invite Vladimir Putin. He is a senior analyst, and he will present his policy paper, Vladimir Putin's Politics of History, how it works and how to keep it in check. I still have to remind you that it's not yet published, but we plan to publish in the upcoming weeks. So follow the news in the EESC. And I would like to kindly remind you, I saw that Katerina sent the link to the GLOBSEC Trends in the Zoom. And Jurgis, I would like to also ask you to put the link to the game. And Vladimiras, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Justinas. So I would like to say a few words about the policy paper that is being presented here. Justinas, I didn't quite catch what you said about the supposed changes in it, but okay, we'll discuss it a bit later. First of all, its methodology. My approach has been neither practical in the sense of journalism or, say, everyday politics, nor sociological in the sense of a quantitative research and figures and diagrams. The two main paradigms used in here are that of political theory and political communication. This means that, as Aristotle would put it, we start with what political actors really think and really say, or in other words, we start with the realm of opinion and then move through the normative political analysis towards some conclusions. The latter are, firstly, the notion of victorious powers in the Second World War is of utmost significance to Russia, because in some sense it legitimizes Putin's narrative of the great victory. To make sure that the intellectual and political energy of the West does not feed into this narrative, or in other words, to ensure that Western countries do not further the cause of Putin's propaganda, we should shift the emphasis away from the victory in the World War to the tragedy of Europe and solidarity with those who suffered in the war. Secondly, the European Parliament's resolution's provision that Europe's tragic past should continue to serve as a moral and political inspiration to face the challenges of today's world should be seen as an urge to evaluate the true role of Russia in this tragic past, because Russia, unlike say Germany, refuses to make an adequate assessment on its own. Thirdly, confronting the issue of relativism in the academia and the public sphere should become part of our battle against Russian propaganda, which is based on the fundamental presumption that the West has gone relativist and apt to consider the Kremlin's lies to be just another opinion, a kind of legitimate position which ostensibly has the same right to existence as any other opinion in the Western media does. And my final conclusion here is that we should not be under any illusions about the essence of Russia's politics, which is lying to itself and to the West, as Alain Besançon explains in his book Saint Russia. Putin's regime expressly ignores the fact of its being a political regime and not culture or high culture, spirituality, or just humble men and women living on Russian territory and having almost a European mentality. So lies, according to Alain Besançon, is essential to Russian identity, to Russian politics, not only of this concrete Vladimir Putin's regime, but of Russia for centuries, and Tsarist Russia as well. So, thanks, it's all.
Thank you, Vladimiras. And as I said, most of the content you can already find in our web pages, and this policy paper that Vladimiras just discussed will also be uploaded soon to the page of the EECT. And now for the last speech, but not the least, of course, I would like to kindly invite Dominika Haidu from the GLOBSEC to give the conclusion of this event.
Thank you very much, Justinas, and thanks a lot again for organizing this event. I would like to thank the EESC for making this all happen. Of course, we're very grateful for our mutual cooperation with the organization and for strengthening the ties between the regions, actually, between Central Europe and the Baltic states, because I believe we have a lot in common and we face similar challenges to a certain extent. So we have a lot to learn from each other. And I think the exchange of know-how is truly beneficial, especially because the resilience building is very complex and requires many actors to join forces and act as one on so many fronts. For us, doing this kind of set of diverse activities is very beneficial also to explore the boundaries of what organizations like ours can do, but also to try different approaches to actually build the resilience and tackle the threats which are coming abroad. On the example of the analysis presented by Vladimiras, we can see how Russia is constantly trying to question, undermine us, the role of the West in our peace and security and so on. And the same is happening, of course, to Slovakia. Right? There are constant attempts, for example, to revive the narrative of the World War II, of Russia being as the only true savior of our nation, right? Ignoring the role of the US and helping the allies. The fact that the Eastern blocs was suffering for 40 years under the Soviet rule. So I believe I'm very grateful for the activities we've done, and this is why we're trying to diversify them, include more of the awareness raising activities into our portfolio, and why we do things like games and advocacy at many levels alongside the important diligent data-driven research. So this is the approach we are trying to push forward, and I'm very happy that the organization like the EESC has joined our endeavors, and I look forward to our cooperation in the upcoming years.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you for everybody who joined us here on Zoom or on Facebook live stream. And as I said, we have really most of the work we've done in our web pages, and that also we have, I think, that both EESC and GLOBSEC has a lot of things more done in different programs with different other partners. So please take a look at our social media and our web pages and find what our think tanks are doing to strengthen the resilience of our societies. So thank you very much and have a very nice evening. Bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Goodbye, have a nice day.
Good evening.